Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are digging into one of the most jaw-dropping financial scandals in modern history. We're talking about a single bank branch, a flood of suspicious money, and failures that went right to the top, ultimately changing the rules for every single bank in Europe. So let's just start with the number that says it all. 200 billion euros. That's the estimated amount of suspicious money that flowed through just one tiny branch of Denmark's biggest bank. To put that into perspective for you, it's actually more than the entire GDP of Estonia, which is the country where the branch was located. It's a figure so huge, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. And that, of course, leads us to the big question. How on earth did this happen? How did a tiny corner of a pretty well-respected bank become a laundromat for a torrent of illicit cash? Well, to find the answer, we have to go back to the very beginning. Our story kicks off not with a crime, but with a business deal. A really fateful acquisition back in 2007 that it planted the seeds for the entire disaster. It was like a financial time bomb just waiting to go off. See, when Danske Bank bought Finland's Sampo Bank, it inherited all its operations across the Baltics. And tucked away inside that big deal was this small Estonian branch. So what made this branch so special? Well, it had this very profitable, but also very, very risky line of business known as a non-resident portfolio. So, what is a non-resident portfolio exactly? Well, in simple terms, it's just banking for foreigners. In this case, thousands of customers, mostly companies from Russia and other former Soviet states, were using this Estonian bank branch even though they had no real business in Estonia. Now, this whole model should have been a massive red flag for money laundering, but it was also a massive money maker. Okay, so acquiring a risky business is one thing, but letting it spiral completely out of control, that's something else entirely. What happened next was just a perfect storm of institutional failure that created the ideal environment for crime to thrive. This whole disaster really boils down to three critical steps. First, the bank just flat out ignored blatant warnings. Second, a catastrophic technical decision basically left the branch operating in a black hole. And third, well, the profits were just too good for anyone to want to ask too many questions. Let's start with those warnings. Just a few months after the acquisition, Russia's own central bank sent a letter to Danske Bank, and they did not mince words. The letter flagged clients involved in transactions that were linked to, and I'm quoting here, criminal activity in its pure form. I mean, you really couldn't get a clearer warning than that. And it wasn't the only one. Estonia's own financial regulators also raised alarms, but they were all either dismissed or just downplayed.
But the warnings weren't even the only failure. Maybe the most critical mistake was a single technical decision. In 2008, Danske Bank decided not to move the Estonian branch onto its main IT system. Think about that. This meant headquarters in Copenhagen had no automated way to monitor what was happening in Estonia. The branch was effectively a blind spot, operating on its own outdated systems, with all the documents in Russian and Estonian completely cut off from any real oversight. So why would the bank ignore all these warnings and create this massive IT blind spot? Well, the answer, as it so often is, was money. And that brings us to the third big failure, the profit incentive. That tiny, risky portfolio of foreign clients was an absolute cash cow. It was generating over half of the entire branch's profit. It was the golden goose, and for years, management seemed totally willing to protect it at all costs, no matter the enormous risks that came with it.
For years, this whole system just operated in the shadows. But eventually, somebody on the inside decided to take a closer look. And this is where our story gets a hero, a British trader working inside that Estonian branch, a man named Howard Wilkinson. So in late 2013, Wilkinson starts digging into some suspicious accounts, and what he found was so alarming that the title of his very first report to management was this: Whistleblowing Disclosure, Knowingly Dealing with Criminals in Estonia Branch. There is zero ambiguity there. He wasn't just flagging some clerical errors, he was accusing the bank, his employer, of knowingly facilitating crime. His investigation was incredibly methodical. He just looked at a small sample of large customers and found the fraud was systematic. Every single one of them had filed false accounts. And get this, 15 of them, 15 separate major companies, were all registered to the exact same address in the UK. This wasn't a few bad apples. This was a coordinated industrial-scale operation.
And still, the bank did nothing, which eventually led Wilkinson to resign in protest.
But, you can't keep a secret this big forever. Wilkinson's internal warnings eventually started to leak, and what was once a quiet internal problem just exploded into a global firestorm.
The whole thing unraveled slowly at first, and then all at once. In March 2017, the Danish press started publishing reports. By September of 2018, the bank's own internal investigation finally confirmed that shocking €200 billion figure. The fallout was immediate. The CEO and the chairman of the board both resigned on the same day. And then finally, in late 2022, the bank pleaded guilty, agreeing to a massive $2 billion fine to settle charges with authorities in the US and Denmark.
When he resigned, the CEO, Thomas Borgen, who had actually overseen the division that included the Estonian branch, admitted total failure. He said, "I hold the ultimate responsibility. There is no doubt that we as an organization have failed." And this is a crucial point, right? This wasn't just some rogue branch. It was an institutional collapse, and it was acknowledged at the very, very top.
So why should a scandal from years ago matter to you today? Well, because its aftershocks completely reshaped the world of banking, creating a brand new reality for financial institutions and, for their customers everywhere. First, let's just consider the cost. To stop another Danske Bank from happening, regulators have demanded that banks spend absolute fortunes on compliance. We're talking over $275 billion globally every single year. And those costs, they don't just disappear. They get passed on to us, the customers, through higher fees and much stricter rules. Second, and this is the big one, the scandal led directly to the creation of a new European super regulator. It's called AMLA, the Anti-Money Laundering Authority. And for the first time ever, there's now a central EU body with the power to directly supervise high-risk banks across the entire continent. Its whole purpose is to stop money launderers from exploiting weak links in the system, just like they did in Estonia. It really represents a fundamental shift in how Europe polices its financial system. I mean, before the scandal, oversight was fragmented, different in every country, and controls were pretty weak. Today, because of what happened in that one little Estonian branch, we have a centralized EU authority, incredibly strict rules, and sky-high compliance costs. The entire philosophy of financial supervision in Europe has changed forever. And all of that leaves us with a final, crucial question for the future. The Danske Bank scandal forced this big move towards ironclad security, but as anyone who's had to provide endless documents just to open a simple bank account knows, that security comes at a cost, in money, in time, and inconvenience. So the challenge now for all of us is finding that right balance between locking down the financial system to stop the bad guys and keeping it open and accessible for everyone else.